This particular view of the bottom floor of the ark is looking in from the side, the longest dimension being to my left and right, a distance of over 500 feet, nearly 2 football fields in length. But the distance across the floor here from edge to edge was also immense, 90 feet. It's by taking these dimensions that we come up with the figure of more than 50,000 square feet of floor space. But it is important to remember that materials could have been stacked from floor to ceiling, a distance of more than 16 feet, thus providing a huge area for cargo. These materials were items that were being stored for use primarily after the ark landed on the mountains of Ararat. You'll notice behind me is the pathway we referred to earlier that could have been used by the large wheeled carts to move materials into place. Also in front of me on the floor, you'll notice there is kind of a ribbed effect here. These beams would have served at least two purposes. One of them would have been to reinforce the structure of the ark itself, but the other purpose would have been to help to keep materials in place during rough seas. Crates or some other form of box could have been constructed by Noah and his sons in which to place materials, and they could have been so constructed as to fit neatly into these areas, and thus perhaps even interlocking would have been very rigid during transit. We are still on the bottom floor of the ark at one of the two ends. And you'll notice the wall here that is next to me. This wall is a sort of a bulkhead arrangement. It is formed by one of the walls of the 4 large tanks that we looked at earlier. We're actually going to go inside one of these tanks and look at it in a few moments. The tanks at the end would have provided a sort of structural support, and it was the ends where structural support was most needed. But also materials could have been stacked against these walls here on the bottom floor. We're now inside one of the 4 large tanks that we referred to earlier. The only way of getting in and out of here right now is this ladder behind me. Of course, once the ark was completed, and before the journey began, we think that 2 of these tanks were probably filled with fresh water for drinking, and the other 2 tanks were used for disposing of waste material during the journey. This large pillar on my right is an example of one of the largest beams that would have been necessary for the structure of the ark. And depending on which dimensions of the ark we choose, this beam would have been 24 inches by 24 inches, or it could have been as much as 30 inches by 30 inches, depending on what size of the cubit that we use. We are now on the top or 3rd floor of Noah's Ark. Though this was the smallest in area, it is by far the most important. It is here that Noah, his family, and all of the animals resided for a period of approximately 1 year. Though it is the smallest of the 3, it is still a very large area. The distance from side to side here is 30 feet across the floor, and likewise from end to end, over 500 feet, even at this level. Thus, the number of square feet of floor space was over 15,000. But it is the cubic capacity which is most significant. With a height from floor to ceiling of over 16 feet, the cubic capacity would have been more than 120,000. And we believe that this would have been sufficient for living quarters for Noah, his family, and all of the animals. In this section of the ark, we have some examples of smaller living quarters that would have been more common for the varieties of air-breathing animals found on the ark. We'd like to thank our assistants here today, both of them. It's important to remember that the average size of an adult air-breathing animal is that of a common house cat. The Genesis account does not give many details on how the animals' living spaces were constructed. So what we have to offer here again is merely in the way of a suggestion. It's important to remember that there were very few large animals such as horses or cows on Noah's Ark. And for those that were larger, it is possible, likely, that a traditional arrangement was constructed, such as what we see here. It is estimated that all living varieties of breathing animals sprang from approximately 25,000 different species. If we make a liberal estimate of both the clean and the unclean animals that were on board the ark, the total number of animals would have been something more than 50,000 and something less than 60,000. For sake of argument, let's assume the higher number of 60,000. Taking that with the estimated cubic capacity of this section of the ark of 120,000 cubic feet, this would have provided an average living space for each of the animals of 2 cubic feet. We read in Genesis 6:14, "Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch." The word translated rooms here really means nests in the Hebrew. The height of this section would have allowed for many nests or other compartments for the animals stacked from floor to ceiling. The size of the compartment shown here is about 2 cubic feet. This was chosen for illustrative purposes, since it is the average amount of living space that would have been available for each animal. The house cat shown here is the size of an average air-breathing animal. The amount of space allotted seems quite adequate. In addition, if the animals taken on board the ark were not mature adults, then the average size would have been even smaller. One other factor is worthy of consideration in respect to the animals. Many animals go into a state of hibernation in the wintertime. Other species have been known to go into a similar state of relative dormancy under severe circumstances. Since darkness would have been the normal condition, even on the top floor, it is possible that many, if not all the animals, went into such a state of suspended animation. This would have solved many logistical problems. It would have significantly reduced the demands on 8 people to feed 60,000 animals and to dispose of their waste. It would also have reduced the amount of food and water necessary on board. Regardless of what methods the Lord chose, the main point of our analysis and conclusions is that such a project was both possible and practical.